The Gates of Paradise is a sublime chorus of voices that just begs to be inhaled in a single sitting. Hey everyone, and welcome to Travel Through Stories. My name is Sean, and today I want to talk about Jerzy Andrzejewski's novel, The Gates of Paradise, translated from the Polish by James Kirkup. Andrzejewski, pardon my pronunciation, was a very famous and very prolific Polish writer who was born in 1909 and died in 1983. His many novels and short stories often dealt with Polish history surrounding World War II, the Nazi occupation of Poland in the late 30s and 40s, the ghettos in Warsaw where he was born and where he was from, and of course the Soviet occupation of Poland after 1945. The Gates of Paradise, which was published in 1960 originally, certainly isn't his most famous work, but it's one that I've been searching for an affordable copy of for a very, very long time. And I should note up front, unfortunately, I don't know how available this is. I think I picked up the last affordable copy, at least from what I can tell online in the United States. This book definitely needs and deserves a reprint if any publishers out there are looking for some neglected Polish literature. But the reason I hunted this book down for so long, and the reason why I'm so excited to finally have gotten it and have been able to read it, is because not only is the subject matter super interesting to me, it's about the so-called Children's Crusade of the year 1212, a pretty disturbing crusade in the midst of the already pretty disturbing crusades. But the formal and structural elements to this novel are one of my favorites, that of the book-length single sentence. This book is made up of one about 40,000 word sentence followed by one, in English, 5-word sentence. For all intents and purposes, this is a stream of consciousness, single sentence novel where full stops are thrown to the wind. Which again, for me, this is a technique, call it a gimmick if you want, but it's a technique that when it works, like it does in Matthias Enar's Zone, in any of Jan Fosse or Laszlo Krasznahorkai's novels, in Lucy Ellmann's Ducks Newburyport, in Fernanda Melchor's Hurricane Season, when an author can pull off a book-length single sentence without any full stops, I find the result to be entirely intoxicating. And that's exactly what this book is. The Gates of Paradise is a sublime chorus of voices that just begs to be inhaled in a single sitting. This novel is about the Children's Crusade, like I said. The Children's Crusade was an unsanctioned popular crusade in the early 13th century. While this crusade is shrouded in legend and the historical documents come much later, and so it's very difficult to parse legend from history, it's a particularly interesting crusade and is one that a lot of scholars have written quite a bit about. After the failed Second Crusade, the relatively failed Third Crusade, and the abysmal failure of the Fourth Crusade, which ended in Western Christian crusaders sacking the Christian city of Constantinople, there began to be murmurings of a popular crusade, or a peasants' crusade, one that skirted the recurring failures of the cynical aristocracy who seemed much more interested in fighting with each other than they ever were in fighting the infidel in the Levant. Ordinary people wanted a crusade because they fully believed in its cause. And of course, most of these popular crusades never got off the ground for some obvious reasons, right? Lack of organization, lack of money, very basic logistics. But what made the Children's Crusade different was that while it wasn't sanctioned by the Pope, it was sanctioned by, well, someone a bit more powerful. See, this crusade has two distinct origin points, one in Germany and one in France, but both begin with a young boy. In Germany, this was a young boy named Nicholas of Cologne, and in France, this was a young boy named Stephen of Blois. And both of these young boys claim to have had visions of Jesus Christ, who came to them and told them to march to the Levant, to the Holy Land, not with swords, but with crosses, and to convert the Muslims there to Christianity, which would thus give Jerusalem and the rest of the Holy Land, which was currently being occupied by the Islamic Caliphate, would give these places back to Christendom. And so these young boys listened. They began preaching and telling people of their visions of Christ. And between them, they stirred up tens of thousands of people, mainly children from the villages that they passed through, though adults as well. And sort of Pied Piper style, they began marching south to Italy with the hopes of chartering a few Venetian ships and setting sail for the Holy Land. And through each village that they traveled, they picked up more and more children. Andrzejewski's novel takes a lot of liberty, and instead of a Nicholas or a Stephen, we're focused on a young boy named Jacques de Cloix, also called Le Beau, the beautiful, and Le Trouvère, the found or discovered. He is a young and lonely shepherd who begins preaching to the other children in his village, and his preaching, his sermon, is a kind of refrain through this novel as we get it a couple of times. God the Almighty has revealed to me that because of the blindness and cowardice of kings, princes, and knights, it is fitting that the children of Christ should go, for the love of God, unto the relief of the city of Jerusalem that has fallen into the hands of the infidel Turk, for the confident faith and innocence of children, greater than all the powers on land and sea, are able to accomplish the most holy miracles. And while all of this history and context of the Children's Crusade remains vitally important to this novel, obviously, they do sort of fade into the background, as what we're really focused on in this novel is the lives and affairs of the various children who were swept up in the jubilation of this crusade. Andrzejewski uses this beautiful stream of consciousness prose and an omniscient third-person narrator to move between these characters, embodying each of their heads for a few moments and seeing the world through their eyes before moving on to the next child and exploring their deepest hopes, loves, and desires. This interlinking of perspectives, though, is just done exceptionally well as it creates this interconnected web of consciousness, this web of thoughts and emotion. No one is wholly individual, and by the end, what we're left with is a single marching consciousness. And throughout, we get these just incredible descriptions of the marching band, this massive unit of humanity as it marches across Europe towards Jerusalem, towards the gates of paradise, with the boldest of ambitions and the deepest of faiths. There floated among the shadows of the forest and the broken fragments of sunlight from the invisible sun, floated among the shadows the black crosses, the banners and baldaquins, and below these, like a great breathing, coming and going, there moved the company's long ranks, shimmering heads of children, the fair and the dark. She could hear behind her the monotonous tramping of thousands of feet that, despite their weariness, kept on moving forward. She kept on moving forward. What drives each of these crusaders is different person to person, but there are two recurring and omnipresent reasons that are common to all of them: faith and love. Faith is obviously at the forefront of all of their thoughts, as they are crusaders who genuinely believe in the good that they are doing. When we're talking about the Crusades, you can probably make the argument that some of, if not many, of the leaders of these crusades were cynical actors who are more interested in profit than anything else. But you really can't make that argument for most of the crusaders. Almost all of them sincerely believed that they were acting out the will of God. And this is only amplified by a multitude in the Children's Crusade because we're dealing with innocent and naive children who really might not understand fully how the world works. But throughout this novel, these children confess their sins to this priest that is marching along with them, and they recount their transgressions and their heretical thoughts, and with each confession bringing them closer and closer to salvation, or at least they hope. And salvation is one of the main reasons why they're on crusade. Pledging to go on crusade, at least the church-sanctioned crusades, absolve you of all your sins. It gave you a clean slate. And while faith and this quest for salvation is obviously central to understanding the Children's Crusade and to understanding Andrzejewski's novel, Andrzejewski invokes it and explores the complicated nature of faith in the time of turmoil. What I found more interesting here is the second omnipresent and recurring reason why these children are on crusade, and that is for love. Every character in this novel desires love in some way or another. And this love is so very tangled as we witness love triangles and forbidden love and unrequited love. And a lot of the love here is queer and thus outrightly forbidden. One character says to another at one point, "I know not whence this love for you has come to me, but wherever it had its source, wherever it found its primal illumination, I shall never cease to love you. For if I exist, it is in order to affirm with all my being, without being loved in return, my passionate need for love." And if that isn't just beautiful, then I don't know what is. The children are obsessed with love, as most of us are, and they yearn for it in all of its various forms: eros, philia, storge. But there is a deep meditation in this novel about how love really brings with it the highest highs and the lowest lows. How if you want love, then you have to be vulnerable and take a chance with suffering because of that vulnerability. And it was then I understood that suffering is the natural shadow cast by all love. You can't not love, but as soon as you do love, that love is divided into love and suffering. And as I noted earlier, one of the main foci of this novel is queer love. Andrzejewski was an openly gay man, and many of his novels, as far as I can tell, are really interested in male-male relationships and masculinity, which work really well here, considering any study of the Crusades needs to touch on masculinity and homosocial bonds, which are so important to any warrior culture. But each of these characters live for love and suffer for love. And if you'll indulge me, I need to read one more quote, because it's so good. For love is a hunt. It is questing and discovering, temptation and uncertainty, haste and patience, expectancy, and impatient expectancy, but expectancy all the same. Love is that peculiar and unique condition of our own purest and obscurest desires, which, yearning for satisfaction, nevertheless refuse to go beyond the supreme limit of supreme satisfaction. For love, by its very nature, being a yearning for satisfaction, is no more than that. It is a yearning for satisfaction, but not satisfaction itself, and never can be. And further, I should note that faith and love go hand in hand, as what these crusaders, these children, are really after is divine love, while also being after interpersonal love. And further, crusading itself is an act of love, as historian Jonathan Riley Smith argues. There's just so much more to say about this book. The recurring imagery is gorgeous and disturbing and incessant, as the same metaphors and images are conjured up again and again as this band marches on through sunny days and stormy nights. And the prose style is just this syntactical monstrosity, as one reviewer calls it, which I really like. As we move between characters fluidly, with the only separation between their thoughts being a semicolon or an em dash. And so they begin to blend into each other, especially as we learn more about their interconnected histories, their loves, and their desires. The prose is just simply hypnotic, but more importantly, it fits the themes and the subject matter perfectly. While this book ends the same way that it began, with children marching, the Children's Crusade is, in the end, a failure, just like the many crusades that came before and after it. While many of the child crusaders simply stopped marching after a couple of weeks and dispersed and went home, many of them got sick or starved to death. Or they were sold into slavery once they boarded ships in Italy and got to Tunis. Now, that latter point might not be true, by the way. A lot of 20th century historians mention this fact, that a lot of the crusaders of the Children's Crusade were sold into slavery in Tunis. I'm honestly not too sure where they're getting that information from. So I'm no expert on the Crusades by any means, but almost every time this is mentioned in those early 20th century history books, there's never a footnote. But I don't know, I could be completely wrong. It might be true. Like I said earlier, the Children's Crusade lays behind a thick veneer of fog. But anyways, this ain't a history class. To end though, I should reiterate that this book was written in 1960 in Poland. I know it's an obvious and perhaps reductive comparison, but it's hard for me to imagine a bunch of innocent people marching across Europe and not have images of the death marches of the Holocaust appear in my mind. The Holocaust ended only 15 years before this book was published, and I think one can very easily read into the details of the description of this march in the 13th century and see many parallels to that in the 20th century. But I'll leave that aside for now. Anyways, this reimagining of the Children's Crusade by Andrzejewski is simply beautiful, mainly because it leaves the crusade behind. It doesn't focus on the crusade itself. Instead, what it focuses on is on the humanity of the crusaders. It focuses on how easily it is to get a bunch of innocent and naive people to march across a continent when they have a worldview that is so easily perverted by systems of power. But even with this implicit critique in mind, at no point in this novel do the children we focus on ever lose their humanity. At no point are we meant to scorn them. In fact, their humanity, with all of the positive and negative aspects associated with that, is really all they had as they marched through the night. Anyways, thanks for watching.